The air on the top floor of Almeida and Cia was thin, an expensive privilege that Roberto Almeida, at 32 years old, breathed as if it were his by birthright. Heir and architect of the company's recent growth, he commanded his empire from a throne of glass and steel, with the city of São Paulo spread out before him like a concrete carpet. That afternoon, however, the view did not bring him peace. On his mahogany desk lay a document that was both a promise of $2 million and an indecipherable hieroglyph, a contract from China, written in a Mandarin that his elite translators could not interpret without generating a dozen new ambiguities. Frustration gnawed at his patience, sharpening his natural arrogance even further. Amidst this universe of power and tension moved an almost invisible figure, Mariana Silva. At 28, she was the cleaner, the silent presence that ensured the office's shine reflected the company's success. With her cart and discreet earbuds, she navigated between desks and meeting rooms, her efficient movements and downcast gaze, a survival strategy in an environment that saw her more as part of the furniture than as a human being. But behind her humble demeanor lay an attentive mind, an observant spirit that picked up on the nuances and tensions floating in the air conditioning. It was one of those quick, discreet glances that sealed her fate. As she passed Roberto's office, she couldn't help but notice the complex characters on the document and the aura of fury emanating from her boss. For a brief second, her eyes lingered there, a spark of curiosity on her face. That was enough. Roberto, seeking a target for his irritation, a punching bag for his wounded pride, saw that look as an affront. How dared the cleaner even lay her eyes on a matter of such importance? He stood up, a sneer forming on his lips. "Mariana!" he called, his voice echoing through the floor and causing several employees to lift their heads from their computers. Mariana stopped, her heart racing, and turned slowly. "I see you're interested in my problems," he continued, picking up the contract and walking toward her. "You seem like a smart girl, always observing everything." He stopped in front of her, the scent of his expensive cologne enveloping her, the height and status difference creating a chasm between them. He extended the document to her, the gesture a pure act of theatrical humiliation. "Since you're so smart, then translate this." Silence fell over the office. "It's Mandarin, a little contract for $2 million. If you can translate even one clause correctly, I'll double your salary." He paused, savoring the moment. "But if you can't, and we both know you won't, you'll have to come here in front of everyone and admit loud and clear that you're just another ordinary employee who shouldn't meddle where she isn't invited." The humiliation was public, the challenge impossible. All eyes were on Mariana, expecting her to shrink, to apologize, and to return to the invisibility of her cleaning cart. Roberto smiled, victorious even before the battle. But Mariana's response was not what he expected. She lifted her chin, and for the first time looked directly into his eyes, her voice coming out clear and firm, though soft. "I accept the challenge, Mr. Roberto." Mariana's word, "accept," hung in the cold air of the office like an anomaly, a dissonant note in the symphony of power and submission that governed that floor. Roberto Almeida's smile faltered, replaced by a brief expression of disbelief. He expected pleas, perhaps tears, but never that serene, almost defiant acceptance. For a moment, the control of the situation seemed to slip through his fingers. The other employees, who had previously been peering with morbid curiosity, now looked on with a shock that bordered on respect. Regaining his composure, Roberto forced a sneering laugh and shoved the stack of papers against Mariana's chest. "Well then, be here tomorrow at 9 sharp for your big show. Don't be late." With that, he turned his back to her, a gesture of final dismissal that erased her from his presence, but the image of the cleaning lady's raised chin stubbornly clung to his mind. Mariana held the papers as if they were burning. They were the symbol of her humiliation, but also in a way the only weapon she possessed. She didn't give anyone the pleasure of seeing her run. She finished her shift with a methodical dignity, each of her movements now observed with a new intensity by her colleagues. Upon leaving the mirrored skyscraper, the heavy and polluted air of São Paulo felt lighter than the atmosphere she had left behind. The way home was not filled with thoughts of revenge, but with a deep anguish that mingled with a stubborn determination. She had no idea how she would translate those alien characters. Her acceptance did not stem from arrogance, but from a limit, the limit of humiliation she was willing to endure in silence. There was only one person in the whole world she could turn to, not for a solution, but for a safe harbor, her grandmother. Donna Carmen's house, in a modest neighborhood of quiet streets and neighbors who greeted each other by name, was another universe. A small two-story house with a stubborn garden that insisted on blooming on the sidewalk and walls that held the scent of cornbread and memories. There, a person's worth was not measured by their job title or bank account. Mariana found her grandmother in the armchair in the living room, glasses perched on the tip of her nose, reading a book with a worn spine. At 75 years old, Donna Carmen possessed a serenity that seemed immune to the storms of the world. Her eyes, clouded by age, were the windows to the wisest soul Mariana had ever known. "You arrived early, my daughter. Was the day heavy?" the lady asked, closing the book and observing her granddaughter's face with the keen perception of someone who knows every shadow and every light. Mariana tried to smile, but the weight of the day overflowed. She sat at her grandmother's feet, as she did when she was a child, and vented, recounting Roberto's arrogance, the public challenge, the humiliation. Finally, with trembling hands, she extended the contract. "And now, Grandma, how will I get out of this?" Donna Carmen took the papers with her wrinkled hands. She did not focus on the drama, but on the object of the conflict. Her eyes scanned the complex symbols, and a subtle transformation occurred in her expression. The look of concern gave way to intense concentration, a glimmer of recognition that Mariana did not immediately comprehend. The grandmother ran her fingers over the heading of the document, where a name stood out in bold characters. "Wang," she murmured, more to herself than to her granddaughter. "Wang family." Then she lifted her gaze to Mariana, and in those depths was an ocean of untold stories. "Mariana, my dear," said Donna Carmen, her voice laden with sudden gravity, "this paper, it is not a stranger in this house. 50 years ago, long before you were born, I was not just Carmen. I was the maid in the Wang family's house, and it was with them back then that I learned the language your boss uses today to try to humiliate you." Donna Carmen's words fell upon Mariana like a waterfall, drowning out the sound of her fears and uncertainties. A whirlwind of questions formed in her mind. Her grandmother, the woman who raised her based on simplicity and honesty, held such an extraordinary secret, a past life that impossibly connected to Roberto Almeida's arrogant present. The living room, once a safe haven, suddenly felt like a treasure chest about to be opened. Do you speak Mandarin?" was the only question she managed to formulate, her voice choked with disbelief. Donna Carmen smiled, a melancholic smile that seemed to travel decades back in time. "Necessity is a great teacher, my daughter, and respect is the door to all learning. The Wang family did not treat me as a servant, but as part of the household. They taught me the language so I could understand their world, and I taught them about ours. It was an exchange." As she spoke, Donna Carmen stood up and walked over to an old dark wooden chest that stood in a corner of the room. From inside, she retrieved a small, time-worn sandalwood box and placed it on the coffee table. The air filled with the soft, sweet aroma of the old wood. "But the story goes even deeper," she continued, opening the box with a reverent care. "Mr. Wang was not the only one who frequented that house. There was a young Brazilian, a partner of his, full of dreams and with immense respect for Eastern culture. A man who understood that business is built on trust, not just on numbers." She paused, looking into Mariana's eyes to ensure that her granddaughter understood the weight of her next words. "The name of this young man, Mariana, was Almeida, your boss's father." Mariana's jaw dropped. The connection was direct, a forgotten golden thread linking her family's humble past to the powerful present of the Almeidas. From inside the box, Donna Carmen pulled out a set of yellowed papers tied with a faded silk ribbon. They were letters and documents, some written in Portuguese, others in Mandarin. "Your father, Roberto," she explained, "was a visionary man. He and Mr. Wang did not just sign a contract, they made a pact of honor. Look." She took the document that Mariana had brought and placed it next to one of the ancient papers. Even to Mariana's untrained eyes, the difference was subtle but clear. There was a seal, a specific character on the old document that did not exist on the new one. "This symbol," said Donna Carmen, pointing to the character, "is not just a formality. It is a promise. It is the clause of cultural mediation. It stated that any future dispute, any misunderstanding, should be resolved not in courts, but through mutual understanding, through respect for each other's traditions. It was the guarantee that their partnership transcended the paper." The puzzle began to fit together in Mariana's mind. The issue was not a literal translation. The issue was an absent soul. Roberto Almeida, in his haste and arrogance, had sent a modern, cold and purely legalistic contract devoid of the promise that his own father had made. The Chinese were not being difficult. They were testing the son, to see if he was worthy of the legacy of trust that his father had left him. Roberto's challenge was no longer a simple humiliation. It was a cosmic test, and the answer was there in that modest room in the hands of a 75-year-old woman who held the keys to 2 empires. Mariana looked at her grandmother, then at the papers, and understood. The task was no longer to translate words. It was to rescue a story. The revelation hung in the room, dense and transformative. For a long moment, Mariana remained silent, the weight of that 50-year history settling on her shoulders. The feeling of being a victim, a powerless piece in her boss's cruel game, began to dissipate, replaced by something new and dizzying, a sense of purpose. In her hands, or rather in her grandmother's memories, lay the key not only to win a humiliating bet, but to save the legacy of 2 families. Her first reaction was an immediate impulse for justice. She imagined marching back to that glass office, laying the truth on Roberto's mahogany table, and watching his arrogance disintegrate. But Donna Carmen, with the wisdom of someone who understands human nature far beyond contracts, noticed the fire in her granddaughter's eyes. "Calm down, my daughter," she said, her voice soft yet firm, like a rudder in turbulent waters. "You do not combat arrogance with more arrogance. If you go there with the solution ready, he won't understand. He will take what he needs, perhaps even fulfill the bet out of pride, but he won't learn anything. The soul of the contract will remain dead, and his father, wherever he is, will feel shame." She leaned forward, the intensity in her gaze capturing Mariana's attention. For honor to be restored, Roberto must earn the solution. He needs to change, and we, Mariana, will teach him how. That night, the small living room transformed into a headquarters. Under the yellowish light of the lamp, the 2 women plotted a strategy that was, at its core, a lesson in humility. The plan was not reactive but patiently active. The first condition, and the most important, was established by Donna Carmen. They would not go to Roberto. He, in his growing desperation, would have to find them. He would have to swallow his pride and come to the house of the cleaning lady he had humiliated to ask for help. Only then would the true negotiation begin. And there would be other conditions, clear and non-negotiable. Total transparency about the company's situation, Donna Carmen's direct involvement in the entire process, not as a translator, but as a cultural mediator, and, for Mariana, no longer the empty promise of a doubled salary. She would demand a real position, a role that reflected her crucial part in saving the company. As the night wore on, Donna Carmen initiated the second phase of the plan, preparing her granddaughter. She took an old notebook and a calligraphy brush and began teaching Mariana the fundamentals of Mandarin. But it was not just words. Each character she drew was laden with meaning and philosophy. She taught the symbol of Zunjing, explaining that respect is not something demanded, but inspired through actions. She showed the complexity of Jinren, trust, explaining that for the Wangs it was like a silk bridge, strong, but taking years to build and can be broken with a single careless gesture. Mariana, with a concentration she had never devoted to anything in her life, repeated the sounds, tried to trace the symbols, feeling the weight of those cultures on her lips and the tips of her fingers. By the end of that improvised lesson, Mariana was no longer the same. The cornered cleaning lady had given way to a woman who was becoming, in her own right, the embodiment of the cultural mediation the contract required. They not only had the answer to Roberto's problem, they had a path to his redemption. Now, all that remained was to wait. Did you know that with each passing hour, the noose tightened around the young CEO? Sooner or later, the door of that modest house would knock, and on the other side would be a desperate man, ready, perhaps, to finally learn how to listen. The days that followed Mariana's acceptance of the challenge were charged with palpable tension in the Almeida and Cia office. Roberto Almeida, trapped in his own snare, simmered with impatience and frustration. With each rejection, each evasive response from his contacts in China, each new contradictory interpretation from his translators, his arrogance gave way to growing anxiety. The 2 million reais loomed like a sword over his head, but the greater threat was the loss of a crucial contract for the company's expansion. The public humiliation of having been deceived by a document he could not understand was a narcissistic wound that flared up with each passing hour. Meanwhile, Mariana continued her routine at the company, the same discretion as always, but with a different sparkle in her eyes. She knew that time was on her side. With each day of silence, Roberto's desperation grew, corroding the barriers of his pride. Donna Carmen instructed her to remain calm, to be impeccable in her tasks, to not give him the satisfaction of seeing her triumphant before the time was right. Patience, her grandmother explained, was a weapon more powerful than any hasty translation. In the small house, the Mandarin lessons continued. Donna Carmen not only taught the language, but also the etiquette, the customs, the philosophy behind each word. Mariana learned about the importance of mianzi, face, about how honor and reputation permeated all Chinese negotiations. She understood that the solution to the contract lay not just in the characters, but in grasping the mindset behind them. On Friday afternoon, nearly a week after the fateful challenge, the phone rang at Donna Carmen's house. It was Roberto Almeida. His voice, usually authoritative, was laden with barely concealed urgency. He asked to speak with Mariana. The housekeeper, with her heart racing but maintaining the composure taught by her grandmother, answered the call. "Mariana," he began without preamble, "do you still have those papers?" The question was blunt, devoid of any formality or apology. "I do, Mr. Roberto," she replied, her voice calm and steady. There was a tense silence on the other end of the line. This was the moment, Roberto's wounded pride battling against urgent need. Finally, he relented, albeit reluctantly. I'm having some problems with the translation. Those Chinese are unyielding, and my translators, well, let's just say they haven't been very helpful." He paused, and Mariana could almost feel the effort it cost him to utter the next words. I would need a second opinion." Mariana remained silent, letting the implicit request hang in the air. She knew he didn't want a second opinion from just any housekeeper. He needed the answer that she, mysteriously, seemed to possess. "My grandmother knows a bit of Mandarin," she finally said, her voice neutral. "She could take a look, maybe." Another silence. Roberto was probably imagining an elderly lady, confused and with a superficial knowledge of the language. The reality he was about to discover was much more complex. "Your grandmother?" he repeated, incredulity still present in his voice. "Well, any help would be welcome at this point. Could you come to my office tomorrow morning?" It was a disguised order masquerading as a request, but Mariana didn't mind. The door had been opened. "Tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, we'll be there," she replied, before hanging up. As she placed the phone back on the receiver, Mariana found the serene and approving gaze of Donna Carmen. The first battle had been won. Roberto's pride had bent enough to make him cross the threshold of humility. But the war, they knew, was just beginning, and the most important lesson still needed to be taught. With great satisfaction, I present the 6th chapter, the moment when truths are revealed and the new rules of the game are established. Chapter 6, The Table of Truth. On Saturday morning, the sunlight streaming through the panoramic windows of the Almeida and Cia office seemed cold and sterile. Roberto Almeida waited in his office, nervousness eating away at the thin layer of authority he tried to project. When his secretary announced the arrival of Mariana Silva and her grandmother, he felt a wave of impatience. He expected a quick solution, not a family reunion. But when the two women entered, the dynamic of the environment changed in a way he couldn't predict. Mariana didn't walk in with the head down of a submissive employee. There was a new straightness in her posture. Beside her, Donna Carmen, in her simple dress and with a serene look that seemed to absorb and evaluate every detail of that corporate luxury, exuded a dignity that could not be bought. "Mr. Roberto," said Mariana, her voice calm, "this is my grandmother, Carmen Silva." Roberto gave a hurried nod, pointing to the chairs in front of his desk. "Please sit down. I assume you have the document." He was eager to get straight to the point, to solve that puzzle and regain control. He handed them a copy of the contract, expecting the elderly lady to pull out a magnifying glass and start deciphering the characters with difficulty. Instead, Donna Carmen placed her hand on the paper, but didn't look at it. Her wise, piercing eyes were fixed on Roberto. "Before we look at this paper, young man," she began, her voice soft but with a tone of authority that made him straighten up in his chair, "we need to talk about another paper, an older one, a pact of honor made 50 years ago between two men, one named Wang and the other named Almeida." The name of his father, spoken with such familiarity in that room, struck Roberto like an electric shock. His facade of control began to crack. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice a bit louder than usual. Ignoring the question, Donna Carmen opened the bag she had brought and, with the same reverent care, took out the small sandalwood box. From inside, she pulled out the yellow documents and spread them across the mahogany table next to the modern contract. The contrast was brutal. On one side, the soul of history. On the other, the cold skeleton of business. I knew your father, Roberto. I served him in Mr. Wang's house. I saw their friendship blossom. I witnessed the trust they built, a trust sealed not only with ink but with mutual respect. She pointed to his contract. This document you sent to Mr. Wang's children is an insult, not because it is poorly translated, but because it is empty. It lacks the most important clause, the promise your father made, the promise that any problem would be resolved as friends, not as adversaries. Roberto was pale, stunned. The story was so fantastic, so impossible, that it could only be true. The stubbornness of the Chinese, the confusion of their translators, everything made terrible sense now. He was not in a commercial dispute. He was failing a test of character that spanned generations. The arrogance drained from him, leaving behind a stripped, ashamed man, and for the first time, truly desperate. It was in this moment of total vulnerability that Mariana spoke, her voice now not that of a cleaner, but of a strategist. "We can help you, but it won't be a simple translation." Donna Carmen continued, completing the thought. "Our help comes with conditions. The first is that you need to prove you are worthy of your father's trust. You will learn the basics of their language and culture to show respect." Roberto, dazed, simply nodded. "The second," said Mariana, looking him in the eyes, "is that this process will be led by me from within the company. The challenge you propose to me is over. In its place, I demand to be appointed Director of Cultural Relations, with full powers to mediate this crisis." The audacity of the proposal left him breathless. The cleaner he had humiliated was dictating the terms for the salvation of his empire. He looked at the old papers, at the wisdom on Donna Carmen's face, and at the new and unwavering strength in Mariana's expression. Cornered by history and his own ignorance, he had only one possible answer. I accept," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "I accept all the conditions." In that moment the CEO lost control, but the man took the first step to find it. What followed was not a mere series of business lessons, but a deep dive into the soul of a man. Roberto Almeida's luxurious office was often exchanged for Donna Carmen's modest living room, which became a sanctuary of learning. In the beginning, Roberto was a terrible student. His mind, accustomed to the speed and efficiency of the corporate world, struggled against the patience and subtlety required by Mandarin. His pronunciation was harsh, his frustration evident. But Donna Carmen and Mariana were tireless teachers. Carmen did not just teach him the language, she taught him the philosophy behind it, the importance of emptying the cup in order to fill it again. Mariana, in her new role as director, was the bridge between her grandmother's wisdom and Roberto's pragmatic world. She made him see not only the Chinese culture, but the culture of his own company. She took him to talk with the factory floor workers, the cleaning staff, the people he had never noticed for years. For the first time, Roberto heard their stories, understood their struggles, and began to realize that his empire was built on the lives and dreams of hundreds of people he had never considered. Arrogance dissolved, replaced by an empathy that reshaped him from within. He was not just learning to speak a new language, he was learning to listen. The day of the meeting with the Wang family representatives arrived. The atmosphere in the conference room was icy. Across the table, 3 Chinese executives, led by the grandson of the original Mr. Wang, observed with impenetrable formality. Roberto's lawyers fidgeted, ready for battle, but he, with a calm gesture, requested silence. Taking a deep breath, Roberto stood up and, in hesitant yet sincere Mandarin, began to speak. He did not talk about clauses or profits. He spoke about his father. He spoke about honor, about the history he was unaware of, and about the deep shame he felt for nearly tarnishing the legacy of trust that had been left to him. He asked for forgiveness, not as a business tactic, but as a son acknowledging his mistake. The silence that followed was broken by Donna Carmen's gentle voice, in fluent and classic Mandarin, which made the grandson of Mr. Wang's eyes widen in surprise. She introduced herself and shared a brief anecdote about how his grandfather and Roberto's father loved to play chess, debating the future as they moved the pieces. The mention of that intimate and forgotten detail was the key that opened the door to the heart. The business meeting transformed into a conversation about family, memory, and respect that transcends generations. In the end, the grandson of Mr. Wang smiled for the first time. The contract was not only saved, but expanded into a new and promising strategic partnership based on the philosophy of cultural mediation that Roberto now understood. That night, in the silent office, Roberto stood in front of Mariana. "You saved me," he said, his voice devoid of any pretense. "And I'm not talking about the company. You and your grandmother taught me what it truly means to have worth. He stepped closer, the respect in his gaze mingling with deep admiration. I was a fool, Mariana, blinded by my own privilege, but you made me see, and I think through this process, I ended up falling in love with the man you helped me become. Mariana smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her entire face. I fell in love with him too, Roberto. 2 years later, Almeida and Cia was a different company, a model of social responsibility and global collaboration. Mariana, now Roberto's wife and a brilliant executive, led the Empire Foundation. Roberto, a humble and respected leader, never forgot the most important lesson he learned, that the strongest bridges are not made of steel and concrete, but of respect and empathy, and that the most important translation is not of words, but of the soul, a language that everyone is capable of understanding, as long as they are willing to listen with their hearts.